In today's episode of Park Spotlight, we have a very unique theme park experience, as this is a complete 100% sci-fi build using nothing but the Planet Coaster sci-fi pieces, which is actually extremely rare to see. I've seen sci-fi sections inside of theme parks, but rarely have I ever seen an entire theme park built with these gigantic, enormous sci-fi pieces. So a really interesting one that I'm excited to dive deeper into. So stay tuned and let's check it out. Hey yo, my Planet Coaster friends, Johnny5 Alive here, and welcome back to another episode of Park Spotlight. Today we're going to be looking at Zuna Park, a sci-fi themed amusement park created by XrayAries, an expert builder in this community as well as a patron. Thank you so much for your support. And here they say, this is my second real park where I worked and learned with every piece I placed. I hope you enjoy it. Zuna Cube is my favorite coaster that I have built. I have a lot of triggers because I am just learning how to implement them very effectively on a large scale. You can see my pathing knowledge grow as you move further into the park. More screenshots available in the finished creation section. Okay. And on the Steam page, it says, welcome to Zuna City Park. This is a part 2 of my tetralogy of parks on Planet Outlet. Each is a unique build with a central theme using many sci-fi themed pieces as possible. Zuna Park is the water district for the planet. The plant is the park separates neuronal acid, which can be deadly to the Alitian people. Zuna Cube is the pride of the city and a fantastic roller coaster. Take a walk around. I hope you enjoy what you see. And there were some custom media files too. This kind of gives me Galaxian vibes, as this creator just spoke about how they are kind of like building a multi-tetralogy of parks on a certain planet. And I guess as each theme park comes together, you get to see more and more and more of the overall vision, stitching it all together for one massive planetary theme park. Kind of cool. Kind of cool. I like it. Well, without further delay, let's jump into the theme park and see what it has to offer. There is a bit of a bottleneck happening here. One tiny little park entrance for all of the spawners. This massive spawner here. They're just funneling in like an hourglass now. I decided to crank up the amount of guests in this park because it seemed to be a pretty sprawling end-to-end mega park. So I just wanted there to be a little bit more of that immersion factor with the guests walking around. Now that we're able to do that, I love walking through these parks with the guests, as over the years, so many park spotlights over the years, we've had to kick out the guests and go around the park by our lonely little selves. Not anymore. So where I can, I increase the capacity. Oh, look at that. These are the custom images. So I don't know if these are all rides. They could be just like monuments. They all have really peculiar names about them. The image is a bit washed out, I would say. Definitely could increase the vibrance and the saturation of that image just a little bit. Camilo. Yeah, look at this. This is what you get when you build with sci-fi pieces in Planet Coaster. They're really, really large, which means you can create these like really epic proportional cities. And I quite like it. It may come off as a bit repetitive, a bit monotone, not to everybody's liking and style. But with that being said, it's not really overused, it's not really overseen, and I think it's welcoming. I definitely welcome this, as it does create for a unique experience that we're not normally seeing. Like, look at that tower in the background. Gigantic, enormous skyscraper with waterfalls pouring out the side. Probably something to do with what they were talking about with their water purification plant or something like that. Fun little backstory and lore to all this. We got some flat rides in here, a carousel. Probably going to skip on most of the flat rides here today. There's a lot to explore at this park, as well as a lot of coasters to go on. I wasn't sure what time of day I should be setting this to. The park entrance looked really good at, I think it was 10 a.m. But because the towers are so big, they cast shadows over the rest of the theme park, right? So depending on where we are at the theme park, I might want to change the time of day just by a couple hours so we get that sunlight coming in, and the way it reflects off some of the, you know, the tiles and the different pieces really looks nice in this game. So I'm just gonna have to keep an open mind on what the time of day is as we're going through some of these areas. It might to get a little washed out and dark, as you can see over here. There's almost no sunlight hitting this area of the park because these towers and buildings are so gigantic. I mean, wow. Now that I'm like, I was kind of getting the B-roll from a bird's eye view, you don't really get the scope and the scale of how big this park actually is because of the usage of the sci-fi pieces. What appears to be like a normal-sized building is actually 10 times larger than what you're used to seeing in Planet Coaster. So from a bird's eye view, it looks pretty standard, but from the ground level, it is enormous. Like the travel time from where we just came to where we're going now. Like, look at this road here. It is huge. It's very deceptive, but I like it. X-Torq. I don't know. That must be the exit. This must be the entrance, but it looks... The reason I was not about to go up it is because it's a priority queue. Or maybe it's not. I don't know. It's a little confusing. Maybe we should be doing this at night. I'll probably be riding, depending on how good the nighttime lighting is, and considering it's sci-fi, I would imagine that the nighttime lighting is really well done. And that means we're in for a treat in terms of riding each of these coasters at both day and night and getting a unique experience both ways around. This is cool. I like going through the queue and seeing like this kind of different screenshots and art on the wall. That's fun. Very creative. Yep, a lot of blue lighting. What? What just happened? Oh. I went up the priority queue. Whoops. All right, here we are at X-Torq, a launch vector coaster with 1.3 kilometers in length, 77 miles per hour, a 41-meter drop on this bad boy here, and 4 inversions and a good amount of airtime. It is green across the board, looking really good. Stats on this are promising. You can see in the background there that the coaster layout looks promising, so this should be a good one. Buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. We're gonna kick things off with a standard seat view. We're gonna go over to daytime and check it out in a track view. Let's go. Wow, that is a wild and crazy experience. I really like the vibrance of this at daytime. Nighttime, things get a little bit washed out, very monotone. I don't envy the creator for having to come up with like a color palette and lighting palette for the nighttime experience. And I don't know, I think that's going to be something I'm going to have to talk more about or think more about as we dive deeper into this experience and, you know, compare some of the coasters to each other from both day and night, and then take an overall arching look at the whole park from a bird's eye view at night. But like, when you have something like as big and grand as this, how do you create points of interest, focal points with your lighting, right? And when you're just using that blue, it becomes a little bit harder to differentiate landmarks and distinctive qualities from one another. And I'm wondering if there's a way that you could have separated the sectors and the areas of the park, both by the choice of color used on the buildings at both day and at night. I'm wondering if that would have lent aid to help create distinct and unique feeling areas. Something to think about, right? And I don't think there's an exact science to it, especially when you're working with things this big. But if you look at games like Outer Worlds, like that's a really good indie sci-fi game, and how they do things, they do everything by corpo, right? Everything has different corporations, different advertising, signage, different build styles and theming, but all feeling within the same genre of sci-fi. And they separate things by using distinct color palettes, build styles, and corporations. And I think that's an interesting one to look at for inspiration, to help create some differentiation between your build styles, theming, and color palettes and lighting. As from what I noticed from a quick peek, I'm a little bit confused of where I've been and where I'm going, right? Because the feel of everything is kind of samey. Not that that's a bad thing. It's just a minor critique. Generally, like when you see a landmark or a coaster, you're like, I'm gonna head over there. But then on the way there, I kind of like lose sight of it, right? It's like, was this the building I was heading to, or was that the building? You know what I mean? And I think just having like those big billboards and signage and kind of like cyberpunk-ify it could help a little bit. Collider. A lot of big open areas for flat rides as well. But this appears to be another coaster. Let's see what we got here. Impulsion, maybe? Viper 1 Impulsion coaster, green across the board, 1,000 meters in length, 6 inversions, a little bit of airtime, 76 miles per hour, almost as fast as the other one, with a 46-meter drop, very similar to the last coaster as well. Very cool. All right, let's kick things off. Seat view daytime, and here we go. All right, very cool. To my point about the lighting, I think what you could do to kind of accentuate some of these rides is really go ham with the triggered events. You know, the collider. You can have these big pulsing lights running up and down with the triggered events, so that you see this pulsing, right, drawing you over to it. And maybe you could just choose like a different color for those triggers. So we go with like a purple for the collider. Everything within like the color palette, I think you're going with this like cool color palette, right? Everything's kind of cool. So you could have these purples, lighter blues, cyans, dark blues, anything on the cooler side of the color palette, but really make them pop a little bit more with the triggered events while you're on the ride experience itself. So it's not always on, it's not always kind of like distracting, but only when it needs to be. And that way it'll like kind of draw you over to it, make the ride seem different from the others, if that makes sense. Just spitballing some ideas. All right, here we go. We got another coaster, what looks to be a floorless or stand-up. Let's see here. Floorless werewolf. All right. 1.7 kilometers. Wow, big duration on this. 73 miles per hour. 13 inversions. Wow, that is bananas. Okay, let's, this one's taken off. Is this the one? Yeah, it's going up a lift. This might be kind of cool at night. We'll do the track view for day, and we'll sit in seat for night. It looks like we're going forward, but we're probably going upward. Maybe we are going forward. I have no idea. Now we're going up. Okay, interesting. Let's go. Holy good googly moogly. 13 versions indeed. Once we got started on the inversions, it just didn't stop. It honestly got me a little bit nauseous. Well, kind of fun and interesting because it's almost like the thematic theme of this one is that of like a storm. So it's like inversion, like we're getting whipped around a tornado, which is kind of like a fun like way to simulate that. Some of them were a little bit sporadic. They went too quickly into each other. They could have used a little bit more breathing room, but still pretty interesting overall. This one is starting to hit a little bit more on that thematic stuff I was talking about. We see something to do with the hazards here. A lot of lights, lightning, fog, and I like that. It's separating itself from everything else. I think you could have ran with that a little bit more. There's that big stormy cloud you could put in Planet Coaster where we're going up and through the clouds and there's lightning striking constantly, flashing lights and stuff like that. And then that way you have like this, what was the coaster even called? Nemesis. Okay, so yeah, just like a little bit more of that, what you saw in the kind of the pre-show going up the queue, adding that to the actual ride itself. Like we have these hurricane sounds through the speakers, the wind blowing in our face, the tornadoes. Using some of those VFX would have actually added to that craziness that's happening with all those inversions. Another talking point that I kind of noticed while we were coming back in this coaster, there's some really good views in this park, and with the Sci-Fi buildings being so massive, you have a lot of space where you could have the coasters kind of exploring around the buildings a little bit gracefully, which is normally actually really hard to do because you can't really build buildings that big. With the scope and scale of a park this big, I think there's a lot of opportunity to kind of have these coasters go up and around these buildings where you have them all up on this hill by itself. I think you could accomplish almost the same thing just spiraling around the building itself, tangling around itself. What might be a little bit more interesting in terms of the visuals that you're seeing while you're on the coaster itself. Also, the contrast of the scenery here is noticing all that greenery and what a nice separation that is. And thought like, how could you push that a little bit further? Having those like hydroponic labs and stuff hanging off the sides of the buildings, or maybe growing on the tops of the buildings and stuff like that. Whereas talking about creating a separation throughout your build so it's not just all white and blue. I think the contrast of scenery and foliage might be the actual way to create distinct separation between things that might help things pop a little bit more. So something to play around with as well, because where I see the scenery and the foliage and where I see that integration, I see that separation, and it suddenly to me breaks up that monotone feeling a lot more, and I think that's a good thing to run with, to keep adding more of that. Definitely. Okay, what do we got going on here? Naqua-Yn? Very interesting names for this. Well, we got like a little Looney Turns. Yeah, crazy one, Looney Turns, green across the board, almost another kilometer in length on this one. Only 4 versions on this one. Thank God, because I need a little bit of break after all that spinny spin. And let's find ourselves a middle seat on this guy. Guess we'll do track view for night, and off we go. right, that was pretty fun. A bit of a snappy barrel roll into an inversion there at one point. Other than that, pretty good experience overall. I think this one is a good example of some of those interactions I was talking about, going around the buildings. We even did an inversion over top of the monorail, which was kind of fun. Navigated around, yeah, I think it was this point here. It was just like snap, spin, drop. But then we got to explore some of that scenery as well, and it really like switched up the environments. I felt like that one had a little bit more of an impact on me in terms of the adventure and switching up the scenery and creating little points of interest that were very attractive throughout the experience. I quite like that one. All right, there are, I don't even know where we have been. Okay, I remember walking up that. At least I think that's the giant platform that we went up. But this is going to be probably one of the ones where I'll have to cheat at some point and check the ride list and make sure we've been on all of them. But there appears to be a lot of coasters throughout this park, so I have no idea if we've made a dent or not, or if we've, yeah, it's all a mystery to me at this point. Oh, a Junior Wendigo, love it. All right, not the craziest length on this one, but 40 miles per hour. That one's going up the lift. We gotta ride this one at the back of the train. Looking forward, let's go. All right, not too bad. A little whippy at some points on that one as well. You can see a little bit of that. Could use some smoothing. Again, I feel like it's a bit of a missed opportunity that you've decided to build. I can understand it, like building your coaster on the outside so you have room to work and figure out what you want to do with your coaster. But you have this like perfect, like you've done all the theming for your coasters with this crazy metropolis that just like having this Junior Wendigo going around some of this stuff and navigating these buildings, you've already got the theming for it here. As we're riding this coaster, there's it's just kind of a bit barren, and you can kind of expose all that and make it so your ride feels completely themed all the way through and through by running it around all of this crazy foundation and industrial stuff. Maybe even have that Wendigo right through the waterfall. I just feel like I look at this setup that you've built here, all these crazy buildings, and I go, all right, it's time to start running coasters through and around and upside down, banking it through here, banking it around those buildings. There's such big buildings to work with that it does the theming for you, but you've decided to go build your coasters in an area that has absolutely nothing. And I just feel like that's a bit of a missed opportunity for me, because these buildings are so interesting that it can create for a dynamic experience just to run the coasters through and around it all. But that's just my thoughts. It appears to be like as we get like into the center of the park here, more of the rides are starting to do that, like this one here, which I'm not sure. It's an inverted coaster of some sort. Or kind of loop back to the park entrance. If we go this way instead, we'll probably run into a lot more rides along the way. I think the monorail looks pretty interesting in this park, so I think I want to give that one a ride as well. Yeah, for sure. The Zuna Cube, that's got to be this, which I'm assuming is the inverted coaster. They, if I remember correctly, in the workshop description, they said this was their favorite coaster, and I believe I've seen a submission from this very same creator where they submitted just the cube alone for Coaster Spotlight. But I figured, why would I feature just that when I could do the whole park? Which I'm glad I caught, because if I would have featured the Zuna Cube and then gone, oh, they did a whole park, I'd much prefer looking at the entire creation in its entirety. So that's what we're doing here today. But the Zuna Cube was a solo Coaster Spotlight submission, and also something that they said they really liked. I have a feeling that the reason you really like this is for the reasons I've already explained. You had fun wrapping it around all of these buildings, which creates for all your theming is done for you. and it makes for a very fun thematic experience, wrapping it in and around all of these mega skyscrapers. 1.6 kilometers in length, green across the board, 51 meters is the biggest drop, 7 inversions, a little bit of air time. Let's go. I think we'll ride this one both at day and night as well. This is a 4-seater, so we'll sit in the middle, and off we go. Wow, freaking way. Funny. This coaster actually incorporates basically all the feedback that I've given on this park so far. Basically all the talking points that I said, maybe if you did this, maybe if you did that, it would make for a slightly better experience. And all of those things that I mentioned were kind of incorporated and included here. And what I mean by that is, like, you have these big skyscrapers, you have this crazy environment. Using those coasters, utilizing the fact that you can weave them in and out, will you have the theming done for you, but also like the variation between color, right? We drop down and we're looking at these parks at certain points. So you get these nice color pops of different things to look at, as well as the big the contrast changes between some of the buildings that we're looking at, especially at the nighttime. We had these cool blue tunnels, and then these big white openings. So there's a lot of different separation between the color palettes and a lot of noise while we're journeying through the actual city here. And all of those elements come together to create a really immersive and fun experience. And with that, I noticed at nighttime that the carousel had these yellow lights, and it actually looked, I don't even know where the carousel is. Yeah, it's back here. here. So if we go to nighttime, it does have these yellow lights, and I actually quite like that. And then I thought to myself, what if you use these same warm lights at the base of all your foliage? So you have a little bit of lights here, but they're very dim. We go with like a little bit more of a warm light setup. So there's little lights around here, maybe a spotlight or something, or just an area light to illuminate the foliage, because the foliage pops really nicely during the daytime, but not at night. So if we had some of these planters that had illuminating warm lights and area lights, during the nighttime, we get all that blue and that white. But then we get that warm light that's highlighting the green and auburn trees to create more of that distinct feel. Because at daytime, I really enjoyed the different colors and pops and separation between everything that we saw. But at nighttime, it just felt like a little bit more of that blue. So when I saw that carousel, I thought, well, why don't you incorporate some of those warmer lights to some of your foliage around the park? And that will help create that distinct look that I was talking about earlier. Well, you want to go with this blue color palette for your park, and I suggested maybe using some different cooler color palette colors to separate some of the coasters. I think what you could also do is use some of those warmer colors to separate the foliage from everything else so that they still have a presence throughout the park during the nighttime experience. So again, to my point, all the things that I was talking about, like how this coaster's kind of out there on the open, bringing those tracks inward around here instead and reversing the layout and having that navigate this part of the park probably would have worked better in your favor, as we just saw from this coaster that's centralized. But with this one, you were forced to do all of that coaster design around the buildings because you had nowhere to escape. And therefore, it ended up just so happening being your best coaster. Same with the Junior, building it inward here. So it's like, you know, instead of expanding your coasters outward, you should have expanded them inward. And I guess that would have made for even more of a craziness as you're walking through the park because you see all of that coaster track. I think this is a very fun concept. You know, while I've given some critiques and some ideas and suggestions along the way for this builder, it's because they're a patron. I want to help, and I see the potential with the park here, and I want to add a little bit of my 2 cents to it. Overall, I think it's a very fun concept. I think there's a lot of good elements here, and I think they could be taken a little bit further. I'm liking what I'm seeing, and I think with just a little bit of refinement, you could go a lot further with it. What do we have here? Otrov. Very interesting names. What's going on up here? Is this a torque launch? Vector launch. Another. Was it there? No, maybe not. That was an impulsion. Green across the board. 1.3 kilometers in length. 32 meters is the biggest drop. 79 miles per hour. 6 inversions. I also saw a dive coaster in the center of the park. So we still have plenty more rides to go on if we include the monorail. So here we go. Let's start this one off with a track view. there it is. Okay, funnily enough, my feedback would be the same across the board, and I think it's becoming a little bit more apparent. The best parts of that coaster for me were the beginning and the end when I was like, oh, we're kicking off, we got the warm lights, we're shooting through, and we're going through the city, and then we pop out to here. It almost feels like what happened to the theming here, what happened to the city, it almost feels like it to be constructed, right? And then we go back in, and it's like getting awesome again. And I think, again, just building what you did here inward would have served a lot better. Now, it's definitely common and not uncommon to just have a coaster layout on the ground with a fence around it and a few trees kind of on the outside of the park or whatever. That's definitely not uncommon. I think what's making it seem a little bit strange for me here is because of the gigantic, enormous scale of it all, right? This is massive. The coaster supports are so high off the ground, it's so tall that it's not a coaster off to the side on the ground, right? It's just screaming up in the air, and it creates so much of that openness where we have almost no visuals at all. And that's where I feel like you've already built these skyscrapers, and wrapping it around that is just like, seems like the obvious way to go, or just continue to build your city out here. So rather than fixing the coaster, you could just add more city here, add some skyscrapers right up the center of this, and just continue what you do and just grab some of these buildings and duplicate them around and enclose that off to create some of those crazy experiences that we had over here, right? Yeah, I pretty much hit on that point, and I'm just starting to see that it sort of like repeats itself as we go throughout the park, and there's nothing that like a small little expansion to the outer worlds of this area couldn't fix. And I think just with a little bit of touch up, some more pillars and skyscrapers and bridgeways, I think that'll all start to come together for sure. And I think we're now arriving at what appears to be the dive coaster. There should be an entrance just around the corner, which might be one of our final coasters of the park. I'll check the ride list for sure. One last bit of feedback that I would add, we see the signs for the rides, but not actually where we go on them. I've actually missed this a couple times. I think having the sign right here would definitely help, but I do like the big ones because the park is so big, it kind of needs it, right? So they help me. I've definitely found all the rides, and navigating them hasn't been a problem. But that last little detail there, just to confirm that we've arrived, is quite nice. 1.2 kilometers in length on this, 61 miles per hour, 8 inversions. It is a dive coaster with the biggest drop only being 37 meters, but not too bad. So I'll cut to it when it's ready. Let's check it out. All right, there it is, ladies and gentlemen. Let me hit the ride list up and make sure we've been on all of the rides, and then we'll talk about it briefly before we end things off. Oh, I totally forgot I wanted to go on the monorail, so let's do that. Pretty intricate city. This one's kind of jammed up. It's always, okay, well, this one's kind of going. Let's go into track view. It's kind of a fun perspective. But I want to see the whole city. The one downside to riding this monorail, I think, there might be too many trains, right? If I hop ahead, the Frontier, this is not the fault of the creator, but more of the fault of Frontier, the trains are never in order. So that if I jump to train 5 and I'm on train 4, or I'm on 5 and I jump to 6, you would think it would be the next one. But oftentimes it's like, yeah, they're completely scrambled. They're not in order, and I don't know why that is. It's a very particular weird thing that they do. So when there is a traffic jam, it's always hard to figure out, like, how do I jump from this one to the one that's in front of me? Because it oftentimes could be the one that's like 3 behind you. It doesn't really make sense, but I just wanted to ride it through the city like we're seeing here. This is actually quite phenomenal. But again, we run into this traffic jam, and if I jump to 6, look at this, and then we jump to 7, and I don't even know how this works. So maybe there's how many are there total? There's 6 total, and most of them are backed up. So I think you could probably get away with running 3 monorails on this entire circuit. Even if they have to wait a little bit longer, it's probably more worth it than having a traffic jam, so that this thing is continuously looping through the city. But the POV experience of this monorail is phenomenal. I'm loving it. And in fact, this might end up being one of my favorite rides in the entire park. It really gives us a nice mixture of the down below city, the greenery, as well as going in between all of these crazy buildings, right? It really sets the stage on how epic and grand this park experience really is. You get to see some of those coasters going by. It's awesome. It really is. And I guess to my previous point with some of the feedback I gave on the coasters, this is what I hoped some of the coasters would do, right? Just kind of like soar through, navigating. There's a good opportunity to have a winged coaster, flying, or a flying coaster at that. Flying in and around all of the buildings, a lot more breathing room. It could go a long way because of how spread out everything is. Just gliding through the city on a flying coaster or a winged coaster. And you don't have to always go 14 inversions. It's always got to be doing something. It's always got to be doing a heartline roll, an inversion, a cobra roll, all that stuff. It doesn't have to be go all the time. There's something to be said about a nice, soaring, cruising, breathing room on a coaster experience. And with all of the space to work with, you could definitely get away with that. So I quite like the monorail experience and how it takes us through. Definitely this cube, I can see the creator said that this was their favorite coaster. I can see why, and that is because of all that interesting dynamic ranges that this has. It's hard to tell which coasters I've been on, which I haven't, because of the names of them all. Oh boy, but I'm going to try to quickly go through this and make sure that I have, in fact, been on all of these. All right, that is definitely all of them. Gotta say, I like this concept a lot, and that's where my feedback is coming from a good place, always is, that I think with a few adjustments between color palette separation, points of interest, bringing those coasters, wrapping them in a little bit more, or tightening up those experiences, it's okay to have them on that outside like you did here. Like, I think it would have worked really well if we added that storminess and the lightning. I think that would have been actually perfectly fine to leave it just the way it is. Some of these outer coasters feeling a little bit like lost on their own or barren, just bringing that in. I actually thought the dive coaster was quite okay because of the amount of environmental theming that you did here. It just felt like a little bit interesting. It was actually a good break away from the city. So I think there's times to use that, like when you go through the nature and you break away from the whole city to give your eyes a break from all that craziness and all that light. And I think it worked really well here because the interesting landscape that we're looking at here. Whereas over here, it just feels like we're reaching an expansion part of the park that doesn't exist yet, right? So bringing that in would have been helped, or bringing that city out would have helped. In terms of color palette and stuff, I think there's some ways to do districts. Like we have like a little bit of a color change throughout this district or this district here, to create a little bit of separation between them, just so the areas of themselves kind of pop a little bit more, if that makes sense. But to my previous point, I think you could also do that with what you had going here, having these planters and hydroponics growing up at the sides of the buildings and using different color variations of that, as well as like highlighting them with different lights for the nighttime experience, would also go a long way to creating that separation. But holy moly, this as a concept here, using these giant skyscraper pieces, using the sci-fi pieces, can create these big, bold experiences, and it runs beautifully smooth because of that, because the park count is technically really, really low, even though the park is sprawling end to end. So it goes to show how efficient you can be with sci-fi, and then from a ground level perspective, it creates for these massive, monumental, epic experiences that you don't really get to see every day, and I quite like that. I'll come to think of it, you know what? One thing that might actually help, and I just thought of this now, is the fact that we don't really have any distinction on the actual coaster track colors, and I wonder, playing around with that, if it would help, right? Going with some of the complementary colors, orange and blue, that might actually create a little bit of pop as well, just giving the coaster tracks a little bit of color throughout. Something to play around with there. I think that's kind of a nice improvement in my opinion personally. And then you can actually tell the difference between some of those tracks when they start to intersect. Is that the dive coaster? Is that the inverted coaster? So on and so forth. So a little bit of feedback for you here throughout this park for XrayAries, but generally overall, I'm a big fan of this, and I would love to see this concept built up further. I love the sci-fi build set personally from Planet Coaster. I've built a lot with the sci-fi, so I guess that's a bit for me why I'm a little bit more interested in it. The cosmic cows, also a big factor of the sci-fi. They use the big pinks and the cosmic colors and the teals, and there's a lot of pop and zaniness that can go along with that, and I just love this concept so much that I want to see, you know, where you can push it, where you can refine it, and that's where it has me generally pretty interested because of the big scope and scale of everything. Overall, I think this is a pretty epic theme park. We have what is an extraordinary and different park than what we're normally used to seeing. Very rarely do we ever get a sci-fi only theme park, and I think that's pretty cool. So great job on this one here today, XrayAries. What did you guys think of this park and why? Leave your comments down below, and that is going to do it for us in today's episode of Park Spotlight. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you all have an absolutely incredible day. Bye now.